Hello, welcome to Vlearn. Today we're with Philippa Foster Back, who is Director of the Institute of Business Ethics in London. Philippa, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon. It's very nice to be here.
Philippa, ethics are surely very subjective. Two people in completely different parts of the world may have very different ideas on what constitutes ethical behaviour. How do we address that?
Well, yes, ethics is subjective, but there are some common accepted norms, as it were, like do unto others as you'd have to do unto yourself and so forth. Those sorts of things which are accepted globally. But yes, it is a matter of choice, and you have choice in life, how you want to do things. And that's really what ethics is all about. It's about making that choice. Hopefully a better choice if you're faced with two difficult situations, but it's actually making that choice.
Looking at the international scene now, companies may be doing business in parts of the world where facilitation payments or bribes are deeply ingrained in the business culture. How are they to address this?
Well, at one level it's quite easy, because under the UK Bribery Act, facilitation payments are illegal, full stop. However, where you are dealing in countries where it's custom and practice that indeed some officials will only get their monthly salaries or make up their salaries by virtue of charging a facilitation payment to hasten clearing the customs or something like that, or try to take money as you go through the borders and so forth. So it is very difficult. You have to first off say, well, is it extortion? i.e., am I threatened if I don't pay? In which case it's perfectly legal even under the UK law to pay it and obviously be safe. But it's really about the culture of the company as to whether or not they say, oh yes, pay, don't worry, or whether they say, no, we're going to be part of the change that there is happening around the world to try and change attitudes. It's much easier changing attitudes when it's the big ticket stuff, the big brown envelopes, the quite clear bribery and corruption. Much more difficult with facilitation payments. But there are ways and means of trying to do that. For instance, if a firm is operating in a country where it is the norm, they're dealing with one particular authority, well, they can go through the UK authorities themselves by going to the local High Commissioner or Ambassador and say this is happening and try and raise it to another level. They can also say no and give me a receipt. You won't always get one, but you can try that. And that just by virtue of challenging it in some way, you're actually going to start making a difference.
Simple question now, Philippa. What is the advice from the IBE for someone who is offered a bribe or is asked to pay a bribe?
Well, they really must say no, and they need to develop the mechanism, which hopefully their company will have given them some advice on, of how to say no, taking the person's name, asking who their boss is, asking for a receipt, a whole range of different questions and points that you can try and raise in order to push back and actually saying that you will not pay a bribe. The IBE is actually developing an app which will be available later this year, which will take people through these decision trees in a highly interactive way, and mostly, or in some occasions, it'll come up and say no, don't pay, just say no. It's called just say no. And other occasions it'll say ask, or here's more information, or in some instances, for instance around gifts and hospitality, where certainly not all of that is going to be bribery, some of it's going to be legitimate business entertainment, and so the answer might be yes.
Recently we've seen so many stories in the media of major corporations indulging in profit shifting and tax avoidance. Why is this suddenly hitting the news now?
Well, tax has always been an ethical issue. The Institute ran its first event on that subject in 2005, and we've just now issued another briefing note on it. It's an issue that is of interest, and so people have been asking a lot of questions. There are more NGOs who are more interested in these subjects, and it's become a hot topic because it's an area that companies have a lot of choice. There's a very long piece of string between what is tax evasion, which is illegal, to what is legitimate tax avoidance, which is legal. and a company has a choice as to where they wish to be on that spectrum. A lot of companies, it's been said, are very close to the evasion line, when actually they might not be. The tax regime in every country in the world is extremely complex, and it's very difficult for companies actually to know where they might be. But I think it's important for them actually to ask the questions, and they certainly are in the boardrooms these days. Actually, what is our policy about paying tax? You know, when we have an opportunity to make a choice, where is that going to come down? And you've got some companies who are paying a great deal of tax. They decide not to avoid it and they pay their full whack. Others who have the opportunity decide to pay the least. It is a choice.
Philippa, in your opinion, is business there to serve the greater good, or does business only exist to serve the shareholders?
Business has a dual purpose. Without business creating wealth, they don't pay their taxes, they don't have the profits to pay the taxes, and they can't make the contribution to society as they are deemed to do through that process. They can't employ people who can't pay their taxes, etc., etc. So it goes on, and we don't have a strong state then to support those who are unfortunately caught unable to help themselves. So business is a very important cog in the wheel. It's by no means the only cog. They have to do their business in the right way in order to be legitimate, really. And I think this is where there are different views as to what businesses should be doing, what might be deemed to be the right way, and what is most appropriate for society. Most businesses work very, very hard to do business in the right way, not only for the good of their own employees and their shareholders, but also for the communities in which they operate, because they recognise that they can't do that, they cannot be legitimate if they ignore the communities in which they operate. So I do believe business is a force for good. I think they constantly need to prove it, and some of them can work a lot harder at doing that. But in the main, I think we're above the line rather than below it.
Okay, hypothetical scenario. A sales director's in a foreign country. He's asked to pay a bribe to secure a contract. He knows jobs are at stake. He knows the company's at stake. What's he to do?
Well, really, when people are being asked to pay bribes and they're in that terrible position that they know that perhaps jobs are at stake back home if they don't pay the bribe, one hopes that the company actually will support them to say no. Because if that person does not say no, certainly if they have a nexus of business back to the UK, that person can go to jail, the firm can have unlimited fines, and the directors can also be fined as well and go to jail if there's any evidence that they actually supported the person paying the bribe. So it is a very, very serious matter, and I think sadly not enough people perhaps realise this, particularly if they're working for a SME company and you know the salesman's out there on their own in doing a difficult job in a difficult place, difficult surroundings. They need to know actually they're supported. Also, the problem is if you say yes once, then they've got you, and you'll never ever be able to say no again. So say no first time round makes life a lot easier. You also actually, and that's a decision for the board, they have to be prepared to know when they want to walk away from the business. And it's almost important to have identified that before you face it, so that the person going out selling in the front line actually knows, no, I can't do that. I've been told not to, and it's more than my job's worth.
And finally, Philippa, can you give us any examples of companies that are thriving because they do the right thing?
It's difficult to name any one particular company because as soon as one does, they tend to have a problem. So I won't do that, but I will mention a couple of instances. Certainly where we have done research in the past about companies who train their employees or have codes of conduct, and we have done some correlations back to financial results, and they've been very positive, and those companies who have actually, gone to the effort of training their employees about, the guidance, this is how we do business around here, then they tend to have stronger financial performance. So I think that's a good generic piece of research that's been done. On the specifics, I think we have seen where companies have failed, they've been tripped up, they've struggled, they then pick themselves up and go through lots of effort to try and do the right thing thereafter. And in the main, those companies then do come bouncing back because they do build trust again, and that's actually what they need in order to have their license to operate. You need to have the trust of not only your customers and your suppliers, but also your employees, because we spend a lot of time at work, and if we don't work for somewhere or for a company we want to work for, we'll leave.
Philippa Foster Back, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that the IBE will have an opportunity to have another discussion in the future.